Imagine something so tiny, so seemingly harmless that it can just quietly unravel an entire industry. We're talking billions in costs, impacting animal health, and yeah, even touching the food that ends up on your plate. Something you can't even see, but its effects are, well, profound. Welcome to the deep dive. We sift through all the noise to bring you the insights that really matter. Today, we're going deep into the hidden world of mycotoxins in pig feed. Now, these aren't just, any old toxins. They're potent compounds produced by specific molds, fungi, often lurking unseen in our food supply chain. Our mission on this deep dive is to really unearth what these hidden saboteurs are, understand why pigs seem to be exceptionally vulnerable, explore their wide-ranging impact on, swine health and agricultural economics, and critically examine the cutting edge strategies being used right now to manage and prevent their frankly devastating effects. And this isn't just some niche topic for like livestock experts. It really touches on animal welfare, food safety, and that intricate economic web that brings food to all our tables. Okay, let's start by pulling back the curtain a bit. What exactly are mycotoxins, and where do these silent threats actually come from?
Right. Well, mycotoxins are essentially toxic byproducts. Think of them as secondary metabolites produced by various species of microfungi, what we generally just call molds. And these molds, they're everywhere. They commonly contaminate grains and feedstuffs. You'll often encounter the mycotoxin-producing ones like Aspergillus, Fusarium, and Claviceps species.
Okay.
What's really remarkable or maybe concerning is how strategically these molds proliferate. Their growth and, crucially, their toxin production, it's heavily influenced by environmental conditions. So think warm, humid climates, high grain moisture content. It's like the perfect breeding ground.
Right.
We generally categorize them into, say, field molds, like Fusarium, which contaminate crops before harvest, and then storage molds like Aspergillus and Penicillium. They tend to flourish after harvest, especially if storage conditions are quite right.
Okay, so they're pretty widespread. But why pigs? Why are they singled out as being so, uniquely susceptible to these toxins? What's going on there?
Yeah, that's a critical question. And it really comes down to a kind of perfect storm of factors for pigs. Firstly, just look at their diet. Modern swine rations rely heavily on cereal grains, corn, wheat, barley. These are precisely the commodities most frequently contaminated with mycotoxins. It's just a fundamental part of what they eat every day.
Makes sense.
Secondly, it's their unique metabolic pathways. Pigs have this peculiar ability to metabolize certain mycotoxins into even more potent, more toxic derivatives. Take Zearalenone, ZN, for example. In a pig system, it gets converted into alpha-zearalenone. Now, that compound is approximately 3 times more estrogenic than the original ZNN.
Wow, okay.
So it really amplifies the potential for reproductive damage.
So their own body sort of makes it worse in that case.
For that specific toxin, yes. And thirdly, their physiological systems themselves are just highly sensitive. The gastrointestinal tract, the immune system, they're particularly vulnerable targets. Mycotoxins like deoxynivalenol or DAWN, they directly damage the intestinal cells. This leads to what people often call a leaky gut, and that means impaired nutrient absorption, among other things.
And this is where the problem often just compounds itself, isn't it? Because I understand nearly all major mycotoxins have these profound immunomodulatory effects, meaning they can either suppress or overstimulate the immune system. So they often act as production disease amplifiers. They don't just cause their own specific illness, they make other existing challenges much, much worse.
Exactly. That's a really important point. When we connect this to the broader picture of herd health, it means mycotoxins can drastically undermine the effectiveness of even really good vaccination programs. You could have a herd, say, fully vaccinated against something serious like PRRS, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome. Right. They might still experience a far more severe outbreak than you'd ever expect if they're consuming feed with even low subclinical levels of mycotoxins. Why? Because their immune response is compromised. And this is subtle, it's pervasive, and it often goes completely undiagnosed. The blame gets mistakenly placed on, oh, the vaccine failed, or maybe it's a new virus strain.
Right, masking the real underlying issue.
Completely masking the true culprit. It's also worth noting that, young, immunologically naive nursery pigs and those high-producing breeding animals, they're consistently the most sensitive groups.
Okay, let's dive into some of the most infamous culprits then. We've got a bit of a rogues gallery here, each with its own sort of signature impact on pigs.
Right. We can group them a bit. Maybe think of aflatoxins and fumonisins as the silent organ wreckers. Aflatoxins, often from Aspergillus molds found in corn and peanuts, they primarily attack the liver. This can lead to jaundice, poor growth, internal bleeding. They're also potent immune suppressors and, worryingly, carcinogens.
Liver cancer risk, you mean?
Yes, exactly. And reproductive failure in sows. Then you have fumonisins, typically from Fusarium species in contaminated corn.
Hmm.
These are notorious for targeting the respiratory system. They cause something called porcine pulmonary edema, PPE. It's a rapidly fatal condition marked by severe respiratory distress, cyanosis, that bluish tinge, and
Yeah.
often sudden death.
Gosh, so those are the ones that can cause sudden, maybe unexplained deaths or just that chronic poor performance you can't quite pin down.
Precisely. They can be very dramatic or very insidious.
Okay, and then you mentioned Zearalenone, or ZAN, also from Fusarium in grains like corn and wheat. This one sounded less about maybe acute death and more about messing with the system.
That's right. It mimics estrogen, so it creates widespread reproductive havoc. In young prepubertal gilts, you see these classic signs like vulvovaginitis, that's swelling, and redness of the vulva, sometimes even rectal or vaginal prolapse.
Okay.
For sows, it means irregular estrous cycles, pseudopregnancy, infertility, smaller litter sizes. And boars aren't immune, either reduced libido, infertility. It's a real silent threat to breeding efficiency.
All right. Next up, deoxynivalenol, DON, also known as vomitoxin, again from Fusarium in corn and wheat. What's its main calling card?
The most consistent, the most immediate sign of DON exposure is severe feed refusal. Pigs just stop eating, or eat much less. This leads to drastically reduced feed intake and consequently poor growth rates.
But the name vomitoxin.
Yeah, it's a bit misleading for pigs, actually. Despite the name, vomiting is quite rare. It only really happens at extremely high concentrations. But that feed refusal alone is enough to decimate production efficiency. And like many others, DON also contributes to immunosuppression.
Okay. And we also need to touch on ergot alkaloids. These come from claviceps fungi found in rye, wheat, barley, oats. These sound particularly nasty.
They are. Ergot alkaloids cause intense vasoconstriction, basically, tightening of the blood vessels. This severely reduces blood flow, especially to the extremities. And the result can be gangrene, actual necrosis, sloughing off of the tissue in the ears, the tail, or the feet.
Oh, wow.
And in sows, they cause reproductive failure, most notably something called agalaxia, the complete absence of milk production, which, of course, means newborn piglets can starve. It's a very visible, very devastating outcome.
Grim. Okay, and finally, ochratoxin A, OTA, from Aspergillus and Penicillium molds, typically during storage of grains. What's its primary target?
OTA is a potent nephrotoxin. That means it primarily damages the kidneys. It's also hepatotoxic, damaging to the liver, and immunosuppressive. And a key concern with OTA specifically is the food safety implication. Residues can actually accumulate in the animal's tissues, particularly the kidneys, potentially posing a risk further up the food chain.
Right, so that's a direct link to human health concerns, too.
Potentially, yes. Regulations are in place because of that risk. Now, if we step back and look at the bigger picture, commercial swine production, one critical reality just jumps out. Feed is almost never contaminated with just one single mycotoxin. Global surveys, time and time again, show that anywhere from 70% to over 95% of feed samples contain multiple mycotoxins.
Okay, and this is where the complexity really ramps up, right? Because the combined effect of these multiple toxins isn't always just, 1 + 1 = 2. Often it's synergistic, meaning the combined impact is far greater than just adding up their individual effects. So levels of individual toxins that might seem safe on their own can become really dangerous when they're mixed together.
Exactly right. And this poses a huge challenge for the industry because most of our current regulatory frameworks, the advisory limits we use, they're largely based on research that looked at single toxins in isolation. This can create a kind of false sense of security.
Yeah.
For instance, a feed producer might test a batch, find that, say, DON levels and ZNN levels are both below the current guidance.
Okay, looks good on paper.
Looks good on paper. But the combined immunosuppressive punch of that DON plus the estrogenic effects of ZNN could still lead to substantial subclinical production losses. Things like chronically reduced feed efficiency or fertility problems that you just wouldn't predict by looking at each toxin's safe level independently. It's a major blind spot.
So, for you, the listener, what this really means is the problem is often far more complex, more insidious than it first appears. It makes it a really persistent, difficult challenge to diagnose and manage effectively. Okay, so diagnosing mycotoxicosis in a pig herd is notoriously tricky then. The signs are often vague, they mimic symptoms of other common diseases. It sounds like a real puzzle for vets and producers.
It absolutely is, and a major factor making it so difficult is what we call the hotspot problem. You see, mycotoxins aren't spread evenly throughout a batch of feed. They tend to occur in these concentrated pockets, these hotspots, where conditions were just right for mold growth. So you could have really high concentrations in one area of a silo or one part of a bag and very low, maybe even undetectable levels, just a few feet away.
Right. And that non-uniform distribution, that has huge implications for actually getting an accurate diagnosis, doesn't it? It means proper sampling is absolutely like non-negotiable. Just grabbing a single sample off the top of a bin, that's almost guaranteed to be misleading.
Completely. You need to take what's called a composite representative sample. That means collecting multiple subsamples, think at least 10 for bulk grain or bag feed from various locations, different depths. Then you thoroughly mix all those subsamples together to create one single combined sample, usually about 5–10 pounds, that you send off for laboratory analysis. That gives you a much better picture of the overall batch.
Okay, that makes sense. So once you have that representative sample, what happens in the lab? What are the main ways to test it?
Well, there are two primary approaches. First, you have screening tests, like ELISA assays. These are generally rapid, relatively inexpensive, and they're often used right on the farm or at the feed mill for quick checks. They're semi-quantitative, meaning they give you a range, but it's important to remember they can be prone to what are called matrix effects. Other things in the feed can interfere, sometimes giving you a false positive, or maybe worse, missing a real contamination.
Okay, so useful, but maybe not the final word.
Exactly. Then you have the confirmatory methods. These are things like HPLC, high-performance liquid chromatography, and LC-MS-MSM, so liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry. These are really considered the gold standard in the laboratory. They're highly sensitive, very specific, and very accurate for quantifying multiple mycotoxins at the same time. The downside, they're more time-consuming and more expensive.
Right. And I heard there's also an emerging approach using biomarkers. What's that about?
Yeah, that's an exciting area. It involves measuring the mycotoxin itself, or maybe its metabolites, the things the body breaks it down into directly in the animal's tissues or fluids like blood or urine. It's promising because theoretically it assesses the actual exposure the animal experienced, not just what's in the feed. But its practical application right now is still a bit limited. Interpreting the results is complex, and there aren't many readily available commercial tests for routine use yet.
Okay, something to watch for the future, maybe.
Yeah.
So moving beyond the direct animal health issues, which are clearly significant, mycotoxins inflict this really severe economic burden on the global swine industry. This isn't just about, sick pigs. It's hitting the financial bottom line hard.
Oh, absolutely. The financial losses are staggering. We're talking estimates in the billions of dollars annually worldwide. And these include very direct production losses, things like reduced growth and poor feed efficiency. That's probably the most common effect. It just means slower growth rates, more days needed to reach market weight, more feed consumed per pound of gain.
Which costs money.
Costs a lot of money. And then, of course, reproductive failure. Increased non-productive sow days, sows not pregnant, when they should be reduced farrowing rates, smaller litter sizes, higher culling rates for breeding stock. All of that hits profitability directly.
But the real sting, maybe, and what makes this problem so pervasive, often lies in the indirect costs, right? These are frequently even more significant, but much harder to actually quantify, like that PRS example we talked about earlier. The immunosuppression means more sickness overall.
Exactly. That immunosuppressive effect is key. It leads to increased incidence and increased severity of other infectious diseases. So higher veterinary bills, more treatments needed, and really frustratingly for producers, reduced vaccine efficacy. You make that investment in vaccinating your herd, but because of the mycotoxins, you just don't get the expected protection or return on that investment.
Yeah, that's tough.
And perhaps the most insidious issue, especially in modern large-scale production, is the hidden cost of chronic subclinical mycotoxicosis. We're talking about a slight, persistent drag on feed efficiency, maybe a minor increase in background illness, things that might just fall within what's considered normal production variability.
So it gets missed or blamed on something else.
Exactly. It gets wrongly attributed to other, more obvious factors. But over time, across thousands and thousands of animals, these small, insidious losses accumulate into a substantial, continuous drain on profitability. And the tragedy is, it's often never correctly diagnosed or attributed back to the mycotoxins. This represents a major, often unquantified financial hemorrhage for the industry.
Wow. Okay, so we've really laid out the problem, explored the complexities of diagnosis, and the huge economic impact. Now let's talk solutions. What concrete actions can producers actually take to protect their herds and, their bottom line? What's the path forward for managing this hidden threat?
Right. Effective mycotoxin risk management, it really has to be a comprehensive multi-step approach. It starts right back in the field and continues all the way through the final feed the pigs eat. Prevention is always, always the first line of defense. This involves things like good agronomic practices in the field, trying to minimize kernel damage during harvest, and crucially, rapid drying of the grain after harvest. You want to get that moisture level down below 14–15% as quickly as possible.
Because delays are bad news.
Any delay just creates ideal conditions for mold growth. Then, proper storage management is vital. Clean, well-maintained bins, making sure bins are completely empty before refilling. You don't want old, potentially contaminated feed lingering at the bottom. And ground feed specifically is highly susceptible to mold growth and toxin production. It really shouldn't be stored for extended periods. Use it quickly.
Okay, so prevention first. But what happens when prevention isn't enough, which, as you said, is often the case?
Yeah, exactly. That's when in-feed mitigation technologies come into play. First, you have mold inhibitors. These are typically organic acids added to the feed. They can prevent further mold growth in the feed bin or feeder, but, and this is the key, but they have absolutely no effect on mycotoxins that have already been produced by molds before the inhibitor was added.
Right, they stop more mold, not the existing toxins.
Precisely. So then we move to mycotoxin binders, or adsorbents. These are substances added to the feed that literally bind or stick to the toxins in the animal's gastrointestinal tract. The idea is to prevent the toxins from being absorbed into the pig's bloodstream, allowing them to be safely passed out in the feces.
And I understand there are different types of these binders. They're not all the same.
Definitely not. It's really not a one-size-fits-all solution. You have inorganic binders, things like clays, bentonites, zeolites, other aluminosilicates. These are often highly effective at clamping down, if you will, on flat, planar molecules like aflatoxins. Their structure matches up well.
Okay.
However, when you look at the more complex three-dimensional branched structures of many fusarium toxins like DON, ZN, fumonisins, the binding sites on these clays just aren't a very good fit. So their efficacy against those specific, very common toxins is often quite limited, sometimes negligible. Plus, there's a concern they can sometimes non-specifically bind essential nutrients like vitamins or minerals.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Then you have organic binders. Often these are components derived from yeast cell walls, particularly from Saccharomyces cerevisiae baker's yeast, essentially. These generally show a broader spectrum of activity. They're considered more effective than clays against certain toxins like Zearalenone and ochratoxin, possibly because their binding mechanisms are different, more complex.
Interesting.
Activated charcoal is another substance sometimes mentioned. It can absorb a wide range of mycotoxins, but it also carries a very high risk of binding essential nutrients quite strongly. So it's generally not practical or recommended for continuous use in feed.
Right. Might cause deficiencies?
Could do, yes. And beyond just binding, there's an emerging strategy involving what are called detoxifying agents or biotransforming agents. These don't just bind the toxins. They actually use enzymes or other specific compounds like sodium metabosulfite for DON, for example, to chemically transform the mycotoxins into non-toxic metabolites right there inside the animal's gut.
So breaking them down instead of just sticking to them.
Exactly. It's a different mechanism, potentially very effective for specific toxins that are hard to bind.
So with all these options, different binders, detoxifiers, selecting the right mitigation strategy really comes down to knowing exactly what you're dealing with.
Absolutely critical. The selection of any mitigation, product binder, detoxifier, whatever, must be a highly targeted decision. It has to be based on a thorough risk assessment, which includes testing the feed to specifically identify which mycotoxins are actually present and at what levels. Just throwing in a general binder without knowing the specific challenge, it's often just a waste of money. It leaves your herd vulnerable, and it gives you a false and dangerous sense of security.
Okay. Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive today into this complex, often unseen world of mycotoxins in swine, from the tiny molds that produce them right through to the sophisticated strategies used to try and combat their profound impact on animal health and the global economy.
Yeah, we've really explored how understanding their specific effects, recognizing that crucial and often underestimated challenge of co-contamination, multiple toxins together, and then employing precise diagnostic tools and targeted mitigation strategies, how all that is absolutely essential for protecting animal health and, critically, the financial bottom line in the global swine industry.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? How these seemingly invisible threats can have such a profound and often quite hidden impact on a global industry that feeds millions upon millions of people. It's just a stark reminder of the intricate balance and the continuous vigilance that's required for healthy, sustainable food production systems.
It truly is.
So maybe next time you're considering where your food comes from, you might just ponder for a moment how that continuous vigilance, that fight against tiny, insidious factors like mycotoxins, actually contributes to a healthier, more sustainable food supply for all of us. Or perhaps, consider how even in these highly controlled modern agricultural systems, the smallest, often unseen elements can amplify problems in really unexpected ways. It
Hmm.
just underscores that constant need for scientific innovation and really meticulous management in agriculture day in, day out.